Kade is with us now. He's out of Ontario, Canada, and Cade's got a demonstration lined up for the evening. Kade, I am assumed that we're in the starting block, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
Kade,
we're
I'm
good to
looking at your
go.
headstock. Okay.
I was
Or is
just
it
on
starting
the
now?
wrong camera there. Cool. Yeah, good to go. All right. All right, so thanks for having me. Today we're going to turn a Birdmouth hollow form. So I'll go through preparing and mounting your material, the tools I'm going to use today, and then the techniques I use. At the end, I'll show how I remove the tenons. And if we have time, we can talk about drying options or finishing options. This demo is usually roughly 3 hours, so I'll have to cut it down slightly. But any questions, feel free. Okay. So I'll keep it on. I'm setting my alarm now for about an hour, hour and a half. So that'll at least keep me somewhat on time.
All right. And when you get done, we'll do the gallery that we have pre-recorded. And also we'll do more gallery from our members. And folks, while Kade is in this demonstration, if you have a question for Kade on this, you can always ask and he'll be with you.
Yep. Yeah, so first off, I'll start with safety. Wouldn't be a demo without safety. You can see I'm not wearing any rings, watches, bracelets, big necklaces or chains, anything that can pull me into the lathe. Long sleeves, roll them up. I prefer short sleeves. Bare minimum, wear safety glasses, but I do recommend always wearing a full face shield that will take some sort of impact. And wear those safety glasses under your face shield because of the centrifugal force of the lathe. And the fan effect that is created can actually waft those shavings up under your face shield, and they can go in your eyes if you're not wearing your safety glasses. So I do recommend wearing this no matter your experience level, because even a bottle stopper, if that came off the lathe, it could do quite some damage to your face or whatever it hits. Last but not least, I don't recommend turning in flip-flops or sandals, because if any size of my blank, which you'll see shortly, this is roughly, in log form, it's roughly 10 by 10 by 6. If that fell off my bedway and I was wearing sandals, I would have a whole bunch of broken bones in my feet. So at least closed-toed shoes. Anything over 10 pounds, I recommend steel-toed shoes. Okay? So that's it about safety. Today I will be wearing, also earplugs. I recommend wearing earplugs. Turners often go deaf due to the sound of the chatter, the tool hitting the wood. So I wear custom earplugs. It's $150 for the pair, significantly less expensive than one hearing aid. So I will be wearing these today. When you ask a question, it might be a little muffled. I'll stop the lathe, I'll take this out, and I'll ask if you can reiterate the question. Okay, and yeah, so let's get started. First of all, when we do look for live edge material, you want to acquire your live edge material within the winter months or the colder months of the year. That is because the sap isn't running freely. The tree almost goes into a hibernation mode. So that will, as that wood dries, the bark adheres to that cambium layer and it solidifies to the wood. Now you can turn your live edge material if you get it in the summer. The only thing is I would turn it sooner than later before that bark starts to release from that wood. There are ways, insurance premiums that you can use. You could use CA glue to go along that cambium layer. So as I turn this, I would turn the outside. I would take CA glue along that cambium layer just as an insurance premium to keep that bark where it needs to stay. Some people say, okay, it might stain the wood. It'll seep in, it'll stain the wood. Yes, it will if you leave it for a day or a few days. What you want to do is apply that CA glue, allow it to penetrate, but then sand the staining off before it penetrates too deeply. That way you will not have the staining where the CA glue was. Also, when I do the inside, I would do the exact same thing. Now these are turned slightly wet. They're not turned soaking wet because I don't want to have a shower and I don't want my electrical equipment soaking wet. So for instance, when I do these, I acquire most of my material in the winter, and my material stays in my backyard for roughly 4, 5, or 6 months. At that time, I then bring it in, cut it into my blanks, and I stick it in plastic bags until I get to it. It can start to spalt, so you want to turn it sooner than later, unless you like the spalting effect, okay? So that is sort of how I prepare my material so I'm not having a shower. So the material I'm using today is cherry. This is one made out of cherry, spalted cherry that I left just a little too long, but it gives you a good color character contrast. Actually, I'll switch to this camera. We get much better view. So here is the spalted cherry. Now, when we turn these, you can turn them 2 different ways. You can turn them with the pith intact, or you can turn them without the pith intact. The only crucial part is if you turn it with the pith intact, you need to make sure that that wall thickness is less than 3/8 of an inch to relieve the stress from that pith. Otherwise, as this dries, it will crack, it will shift, and you'll have 2 halves to your birdmouth hollow form. But the key is consistent wall thickness. So for instance, 1/8 of an inch here, 1/8 of an inch all the way down here, and 1/8 of an inch on the bottom. That way this will dry evenly, efficiently, with minimal warping and moving, but also it has equal forces on those sidewalls because we have consistent wall thickness. If I have thick wall, thin wall, thick wall, the thin wall is going to dry quicker than that thick wall, and that thick wall is going to crack, and you'll probably have a split halfway through your birdmouth hollow form. So the key is consistent wall thickness. If you leave the pith in, it has to be less than 3/8. So for the most part, most of my birdmouth hollow forms are 1/8 of an inch wall thickness or less, okay? And I will go through that as well with the demo. So I'll just show you a couple examples first. Here is one where you have the pith intact. Now we do know wood moves, especially if it's wet, even if you have consistent wall thickness. But consistent wall thickness will minimize the movement. So we know that the end grain will elongate, the side grain will squish. So for instance, when I turned this piece, it was this shape. As it dried, the end grain elongated, the side grain squished, giving me a heart-shaped birdmouth hollow form, okay? That's if I have the pith higher on this curve. If I have the pith lower on the curve, it will be more oval shaped, okay? Like this one here. Still heart-shaped, but more bulbous and oval-shaped on that curve because that pith is much lower on this hollow form. Now this is maple, spalted ambrosia maple or soft maple, and that was turned to 1/8 of an inch wall thickness. Okay. I have 2 here in ash. Here's one in ash with the pith intact. Almost looks like a grumpy guy looking at you. Okay.
Oh, don't tell that to Brenda.
We'll start seeing things in them. Now this one is also pith intact, and I did this when my wife was pregnant. It was inspired by her beautiful pregnant belly. Okay. So now you don't have to do them with the pith intact, but if you do, your wall thickness has to be less than 3/8 of an inch. You can also take that log and you can split it in half, and you can do them in 2 halves. That way we don't have the pith to contend with. If we have the pith to contend with, the wall thickness has to be less than 3/8 of an inch. But if we don't, the wall thickness can be whatever you desire. But if you want this to dry evenly and efficiently with minimal warping and cracking, you want consistent wall thickness from the top of the form down the side walls. Even the base is 1/8 of an inch wall thickness, okay? So here's a couple that are out of cherry. One's spalted, one is not. Here's one in honey locust. Beautiful gnarly bark on honey locust. And the color contrast between the heart and sapwood. Now I want to turn these wet because I want that contrast. If I allow these to dry, the pink is going to bleed into the white, and it's going to be one solid color of honey locust. I won't have that color contrast. So there are different design elements and aspects that you can do to maximize your finished product. Of course, we want to keep the bark on a live edge piece, but if it comes flying off, no big deal. It's a design opportunity, right? So what you can do is you can carve this, burn this, texture it, or embellish it in any way you like, okay? Or leave it natural. It's still a live edge piece. It just doesn't have the bark on it. Now here's a couple big ones, and we'll get right into making a mess. Now this is a big piece of cherry. Almost looks like an alien or a skull here. Hey, Brenda? This one had a branch that was coming out of the side of the piece. And I made that the feature. So this one's footed, 1/8 of an inch wall thickness all the way down. And this is also 1/8 of an inch because the curve goes into the base of my foot, okay? Giving me consistent wall thickness throughout. Okay, so that's one in cherry. Here's another one in cherry. Now on this side, we can't see anything really in it. There might be an egg or a baby in a belly. On this side, I see a face. Almost like, remember the cone heads with the tall foreheads? It's almost like a cone head with his two little eyes down here. These could be horns. But you never know what you're going to get within that wood until you're done. These have the pith intact as well, okay? All right, so how do I prepare my material if I am turning a pith intact piece? I'll quickly talk about both, and then we'll get into doing the half log form, okay? So I have two pieces here. These will be for pith intact Birdmouth hollow forms. Now a little bit of a safety tip here. I cut all these on the bandsaw. Now when you cut round stock on the bandsaw, you have to be very careful. So for instance, if I had a piece that had a branch coming out the side of it, all the force on your bandsaw is downwards into that table. So if you're cutting a round stock and you don't have any part of it grounded to the table or anchored, you might get a twist due to that downward force of the bandsaw blade. And you don't want your fingers underneath it because it can crush your fingers as it twists. Or if the blade is a little close to your finger, it can twist and throw your finger into the blade. So safe cutting on the bandsaw. If I have a branch that sticks out, I actually anchor that to the table and I run that along the table as I cut this through the bandsaw. That will counteract the twisting force, throwing my hands into the blade or crushing my fingers, okay? But say I don't have that. One thing you can do is you can take a piece of plywood. I actually don't have one here, but I have something that will show sort of a diagram. So say this is a piece of plywood, and I take a 1x1 and a 1x1, and I glue those just like that. Now my log would actually sit on that jig in that little V groove, and I would cut it that way as I slide this across my table, and that will counteract the twisting force into the blade, okay? Now you can make that out of a 2x3 with 1x1s glued on, or brad nailed, or you can use plywood glued together. Another thing you can use is a bar clamp. So I can take my bar clamp, I can clamp this piece of wood, and I can anchor this side of the bar clamp to run anchored to my table. So as I stick this through the blade, again, it's not twisting and crushing my fingers. Okay, so a little bit of a tip of cutting round stock on the bandsaw safely. Okay. Once I have cut my pieces to size, I then cut them to the desired dimensions. Then I take them. Now I have a flat surface. Now I lie that flat surface on the table and I cut a sliver off the bottom. I do that because I need a flat reference for my drill press. Because I do want to find the center of this hollow form so it runs true and it is as balanced as possible when I start turning. So I can start turning at a safe, fast speed that is comfortable for me. Turn at a speed that is comfortable for you, not necessarily a speed that Jimmy Clues turns at or I turn at. Okay? Now, once I have taken this to the bandsaw, I have a flat surface. I take this and I need to find my center. So 3.5, half of that is 1 3/4. I then find the center of this. So I'm roughly at 5.5. So 2 3/4 is my halfway point. I mark that with an awl. I take that to my drill press and I drill a 1-inch hole, because my drive spur is 7/8 of an inch. Now, some people think, why wouldn't I just mount that on the lathe on the bark? You could, I suppose, but the bark is the softest part of this tree. So if you're too heavy-handed over here or get a catch, that is just going to spin and chew away the bark until there's nothing left there to hold it on the lathe. And it comes flying through the air, and it could be potentially hazardous. So the reason I drill that hole is because I want solid wood. I drill down past that bark, past that cambium layer, into solid wood, but I also have 1/8 of an inch encapsulated in my spur drive, and I have tailstock support, remember? So even if I am heavy-handed or get a catch, this is staying on the lathe, and it's not flying through the air, okay? So that is why I do it that way. So that would be how I would prepare my material for a pith intact hollow form, okay? Now we'll quickly talk about a non-pith intact hollow form. So first thing we do is we take our wood log. First thing we need to do, we need to cut our round log. So you could cut that with a chainsaw, or you could cut it with a bandsaw using safe bandsaw cutting methods that I just talked about. Once you've done that, we have a flat surface. So we sit that on the table and we cut through the pith because we want to relieve that stress from the pith. Now we have two halves. We have two halves, okay? So we have two hollow forms or two live edge bowls or whatever you like, okay? But in this case, we're doing birdmouth hollow forms. So the first thing I do, now I've cut through the pith, I have a flat surface. Now I measure this. I believe this is about 6 inches. Yep, exactly 6 inches. So I eyeball it. sticking 3 roughly in the center, and I take that to the bandsaw. Now that I have this flat surface to sit on the table, okay. Now I have that flat on the surface. Now I take that to the bandsaw and I cut these off. Now I have a 6x6 blank that is 6 inches deep. Ready, perfect to start turning my Birdmouth hollow form, okay? Save these because these can be finials, pens, inlays, or fire starters. Or you can actually cast them in epoxy, okay? So remember, there's no such thing as scrap wood, okay?
According to Kim Tippin, that's the rule.
Right, Kim? So here, I'm just going to put this back on. Now this is spalted. Spalted, anything spalted, I would be wearing a respirator. So I'm not going to turn this piece while I'm doing a demo, and I can't necessarily wear a respirator because it would be slightly muffled. So I'm going to use this piece that hasn't been sitting around too long, and it's not spalted at all, okay? I'll just throw this back in the bag to continue spalting for another couple weeks or till my next demo, which is actually next week. Or, I don't know, I got so many. I think I got 2 next week and 2 the week after, but anyway. All right, so now we have our piece prepared, and look at that. It's like Rachel Ray. I took it out of the oven and it's ready. We've cut these off already. We've measured. We've found our centers. 6 inch, 6 1/4, so 3 1/8. Here I have 5 1/4, so 2 3/4. There's my center point. I mark it with an awl, and then I take that to my drill press. Forstner bit follows that hole that I made from the awl. Now, I turn these between centers. I don't put them in a faceplate because you need a flat surface for a faceplate. I suppose I could drill a hole, use a wormwood screw, but the opening of my Birdmouth isn't going to be as petite as I may like it. So I do it between centers. Now I use a 4-prong spur drive just because that's what I use and that's what I'm used to. I never have used or owned a step center, but if that is a safer option for you, use it, okay? Now balancing this material and mounting this material. So the first thing I do, one question I had was, do you find the center on the bottom half? No, I don't, because depending on the curve of this, I may have to move this slightly to get it as balanced as possible so I can turn it a safe, fast speed, comfortable for me, okay? So I don't find my center on this side, but I will show you how to balance this material. So for instance, we'll throw it way offside at first, okay? So I can show how to correct it. Now, when I go to balance this, I lock my tailstock in, but I only have the pinhole in. I don't turn the quill to make that pinhole deeper, because if I'm off slightly and I need to move a 1/16 of an inch or a 32nd, the hole is the live point of my live center will always follow that hole, and you'll be chasing your tail trying to get it centered. So just bring it up for support at first, okay? Now, how do I get this perfectly balanced? I take my finger, I rest it on my headstock here, just like this, stationary. I turn the piece, and I can see I'm about 3/4 of an inch away. So I need to move 3/8 in the opposite direction. I need to move this 3/8 in the opposite direction. So I take that right about there. And I do this again. Now, I need a little bit of support so it stays there, but you don't want a deep hole that it's going to constantly follow. Okay, I do this again. And okay, I'm 1/8 of an inch away. So I would have to move this a 1/16 in the opposite direction. If you're off a 1/16 or in 32nd, it's not a big deal. You'll chase your tail trying to move this a 32nd. So within 1/8 is good enough. Okay. So now I can actually tighten my quill. I can see here. I'm also relatively centered within the blank. So I know I'm centered this way as well as this way, but also the height of my piece is centered from one side to the other. So this will be turning as balanced as possible when I start the lathe. Okay? Now I tighten my quill so that is up against the wood. I tighten my headstock. I give this a little bit of a shake because it is wet wood. It will compress. And I turn my quill an extra half a turn because I want a good bite that will drive this safely and efficiently, but more importantly, keep it on the lathe. Now I set up my tool rest to a 45 degree to this corner, and always spin the piece of wood before you start the lathe. Okay, we don't want to break our tool rest. We don't want any wood flying through the air. Now I can start the lathe. But first, I need to put my earplugs in, my safety glasses down, and my face shield on. Any questions? Any questions so far? Well, I just take a sip of iced tea.
I think we're doing good. Everybody else all right? I mean, it looks like he's winging it, but yeah, we're going to keep going.
All right. So first thing I do, turn the speed of the lathe down. I need to put my safety glasses on and my face shield on. And when I start the lathe, I'm listening for a wobble or a wobble, almost like a bad tie rod or that sound will tell me that this is not as balanced as possible, as good as I can get it, so I can turn at a safe, fast speed. I'm also listening for a click or a crack. If you hear that, shut down the lathe immediately and re-inspect the wood for cracks. Okay? We don't want any centrifugal force pulling that crack apart and potentially having multiple pieces of wood flying through the air. Now this weighs probably 5 pounds. So if it did come off the lathe traveling at 3,000 RPMs, it could hit me traveling over 100 kilometers an hour. So don't stand in the line of fire. Okay? Now the tools I'm going to use today for the outside shaping will be an Irish grind Ellsworth grind bowl gouge. I have 2 of them. This one is a 55 degree bevel angle swept back, and this one is a 60 degree bevel angle swept back. Really comes down to preference and how you use that tool. Okay. Always anchor the tool to the tool rest, flute facing in the direction I'm cutting. And take maybe 1/8 of an inch at a time. You don't want to get too overzealous and take too heavy of a bite. Now I'm only turning right now at 700. Now I'm at 1500. Okay. Slow down as we start to get close to that bark edge because we do not want to push the bark off of that piece.
Trace, when you can, stop and show the impact you've
And
had
you
with
can
that
see
tool.
I have quite a gap here. You always want more tool on this side of the tool rest than that side of the tool rest because you will get more vibration and potentially present that tool wrongly. Okay. So it's okay to move the tool rest, but shut down the lathe first because we don't want this spinning and hitting your tool rest, giving you a surprise and wood flying through the air. Also, you don't want it too close because if it bounces against this, your tool is going to fall off your tool rest and potentially into your hand. Okay. We want to have enough support that it stays on the tool rest as I am in a bevel rubbing cut. Okay. Now, let's talk about wood grain for a quick second. Wood grain orientation. Now, the fibers of this are running in this direction. One of the laws of wood turning is you always want to cut downhill. So for instance, here we can see the fibers of this wood as they run in this direction. So in order to cut downhill, I cut from the bottom of my hollow form to the top curve of that hollow form. And I'm cutting downhill because the fiber underneath is supporting the fiber being cut, giving you a nice finish. If I were to cut this way, it would separate, separate, cut, separate, cut, separate, cut, giving you tear out and all that added sanding. Excuse me. So for instance, this is the bottom of your bowl for your downhill cut to the top of that curve. Now, on the contrary, when I cut in this direction, I cut to the top of that curve because that would be cutting downhill. But in order to make that cut, I need to cut uphill to get to there to cut back downhill. So my final pass will be a downhill cut from the smallest part of that birdmouth to the highest wing of that birdmouth, and I will show you those cuts. I'm just trying to give you a visual of the grain orientation and why I am making those cuts to maintain downhill cutting so I get a superior finish with far less sanding, okay? Now, I'm only going to bring this up to here. You enter slowly. You can speed up, but you want to slow down on the exit because we don't want to push this bark off. And I only want to go so far because I have to come back to create the bottom portion or the top portion of the top curve for my hollow form, okay? So at first, I really just rough it out. So I will continue to go a little further, bringing this up to about here, and then I will start the uphill cut with the downhill cut to the highest point of my curve, okay? It will all make sense when you see it. Okay. Now my tool rest is below center because I'm using a gouge and I am cutting at center with that bottom wing. There we are. I'm pretty close to where my tenon is going to be, so I leave that for now, and I rough shape the top portion of my birdmouth. I create that tenon last because this is wet wood, and I don't want that tenon to warp in any way, giving me a slack fit within my tenon, okay? So I need to move my tool rest. To cut in this direction. So now to define the portion of my birdmouth, I am actually going to cut in this direction from the highest point of that bark edge in to about here, and then I bring that curve back around to cut downhill. So you can see that here, riding bevel into there, peeling cut into a bevel rubbing cut, just like so. Okay. Oh, a good thing to have when doing live edge bowls is light. Now I'll use my light bar here. And another thing you can use, which will also give you a better view for the form and the piece taking shape, is a white backboard. Now this will allow me to see the shape as it unfolds, but it will also make it much easier for me to see that ghost wood. So now I can see that bark edge as it spins, as well as my light is going to light up that corner for me as well. So I'm just going to move this slightly. There we are. My light is pretty good, but now it's much more visible for us to see. We can see that ghost wood within here. We can see the highest point of that log, probably a ½ inch away from my fingertip there. Okay, so that's where I want to start. And then peel it away. So I did that cut. I come in on a bevel rubbing cut. I ride the bevel. As I approach that wall, I close my flute so I do not run into a catch with that lower wing. Now at that point, I drop the handle into a peeling cut. Now I'm in a bevel rubbing cut, and I can proceed through the cut. Okay. Now we can see it starting to take shape. Now some of the cuts will be quite quick after I explain it, just because I'm on limited time. So now we can see our bird mouth is starting to take shape. But when I make a bird mouth, I also take into account the golden rule, or the golden ratio. So for instance, with this piece, I have 2/3 diameter to 1/3 diameter, 2/3 diameter to roughly 1/3 diameter. 2/3 diameter to the opening is 1/3 diameter. Now here I have 2/3, 1/3, but also 2/3, roughly 1/3 for my overall design element, incorporating the golden ratio. Now why is the golden ratio so pleasing to the human eye? It is so pleasing to the human eye because we see it in everyday life. We see it in one another. So for instance, if you take your forearm in your hand, we have 1/3, 2/3 to your forearm. If you look at your face and your proportions, the distance from your nose to your chin is 1/3, 2/3. So it's very aesthetically pleasing to the human eye because we see it every day in one another and in nature. If you look at flowers and bulbs of flowers or tulips or many different things, even animals, you will start to see the golden rule. Okay. So this will incorporate the golden rule. So the highest part of this curve will be 2/3, 1/3. The overall diameter will be 2/3 to roughly 1/3 of the opening. The bottom where it sits will be 1/3, 2/3. And the opening can also be 1/3, 2/3 the overall height. Okay. Now I need to move this closer because I have quite an overhang here. So I get a bit of vibration the further that overhangs. Okay. So I'm just going to move this as close as I can. Now watch out for that bark. Watch where you keep your hand. Keep it on the side of the tool rest, because that will be like a meat grinder to soft skin. Okay. So we'll continue to make the opening smaller and refine this curve. Okay. Here we are, face shield down. Now you can make your bird mouth as long or as flat as you like. There. Now we have the highest point of that curve at 2/3, 1/3. Now I just need to refine the size of the opening, but I'm going to clean this off so we can see. And in order with those downhill cuts, we can see the finish right off the tool. I could start sanding and finish sanding at 240. Okay. So I need to come a little thinner here. Really, the proportions of the golden rule strictly have to be on the outside, because this is what everyone sees. If the opening is slightly bigger or less, it's not a big deal. But keep in mind, the bigger the opening, the further your wood turning buddies can get their fingers in there and they can see how you finished the inside of the piece. Okay. I'm just going to measure this quick. 2 1/8, 3 1/2. So I'm almost at that 2/3, 1/3. Remove about another 1/8 or so, and we'll be golden. I'm going to remove this, and I'll put that there for now, just so I can get a little closer, so I have less vibration on my tool. And I'm going to switch to a sharp tool. So this is my 60 degree. And I'm floating the bevel because I do not want to push that bark off. There we are. That's pretty good. So I have my rough shape. Now I just need to create my tenon refine the finish so I have a finishable finish. Now, the opening of your neck can be as long as you like. It can be as sharp of a curve or a change of curve as you like. That all comes to preference in your design elements. So I like that quite nicely because I'm at my 2/3, 1/3, a little bit of separation between the concave and the concave. And then obviously the bottom will be much smaller, which will give it lift and also incorporate the golden rule. Similar to this piece. We remove this portion last when we remove the tenon, okay? All right, we're doing pretty good for time, good. So now I just need to do my final finishing pass. So all of the cuts I made were 1/8 of an inch or greater. So now my finishing cut is going to be a 32nd of an inch cut in a bevel rubbing cut. Okay. Now here, I can't get around here to do a bevel rubbing cut because I would have to be over here. So what I need to do here is a shearing cut. So my handle is low. And I am cutting at an angle, at a skewed angle across that long, flat, swept back part of my bowl gouge, which gives you that fine, fine angel hair pasta primavera, which ensures that you're doing a fine finishing cut. And I just refine this part of the curve on a shearing cut just to blend them. There we are. Now this will be smaller. To incorporate that golden rule. There we are. Now all these cuts on this wall were uphill. So now I need to do a downhill cut in this direction so I have a nice finished surface. It's not too bad, but I have a little bit of tear out. I could sand it out, but who likes sanding? I like as minimal sanding as possible. So I do a fine little, I had a little bit of a bloop here. It's the technical term. So I do a shear scraping back in this direction, but make sure you do not bury that nose on the bottom curve of that birdmouth hollow form, because it will catch, it will go, you will get a violent catch, and all that bark will come off and smack you right in that face shield. Now that's also why we are wearing a face shield when turning live edge material, because you never know when that bark could potentially come flying off. Especially at this point when it goes so thin and I'm doing that fine shearing cut. There we are. There. I just need to clean this up slightly. There we are. There. Now we have a nice finished surface that we can start sanding and finish sanding. at 240, or start at 240 and sand up to your desired grit. Okay. At this point, I would sand. I would define my tenon, and I'll just very lightly sand. I'm not going to sand much, but with good tool control, bevel riding cuts, I only need to sand this piece very little. And it's wet wood, so wet sanding actually goes a little quicker. Because the fibers of the wood are moist, they sand nicer. They're not so dry and dusty and takes longer to sand. Now this isn't too bad in here because I'm all on solid ground. I have one solid cylinder with no ghost wood. So I have no danger of getting clipped by that bark fan blade unless I neglect to pay attention. Now, how do I sand that portion? I will also show you because that is a great safety tip. Now, when I sand this spinning wing, I'm not going to have my fingers sanding up here because this is spinning in this direction. And if that clips my fingers, it's going to jam them like a basketball or a football, but it will also throw my fingers into that airspace and get cut up quite violently by that sharp bark. Now, I'm also not going to sand at that center point because this force is coming down across the top of my fingers. Again, that spinning fan blade, I'll be sanding, but it will throw me into that airspace, come back around, and it will do a number on your skin. I'll actually show that better on this camera. So we would be sanding. If we come off where we have solid ground, we'll be out here. It will throw your hand into that airspace, come back around and tell you not to where not to put your hands, okay? So we do not sand up here. We do not sand at center. We sand in a trailing mode down here. But most importantly, when I sand a live edge bowl or a heavy wing, I want to stay anchored on solid ground. So here, that inch from the opening of my mouth to here, that's my solid ground. So my fingers stay on solid ground. And I feather my back fingers out to sand this portion while staying grounded on solid ground so my hand does not get thrown into that airspace. Okay, that makes sense. Similar to martial arts, you always stay grounded on solid ground. You have far better balance that way, and you won't get thrown around so easily. So I will be sanding like this, and then my fingers will flare out just like this to that outer edge, okay? And I will go back and forth, just like that, but keeping contact within that solid ground. Now with that wing spinning, you want to sand at a higher speed than normal because you want that to come back around on you quick enough so you don't get caught within that airspace. Okay, so here I'm on solid ground, and I flare my fingers out to that edge, keeping me on solid ground from being thrown into that airspace. Okay? Ask me how I know. You'll only do that once or twice. Now, also, how is my hand anchored? I have my hand anchored to my tool rest. I don't have it over top of my tool rest because if I caught that, it could articulate your wrist or your arm or your hands down across the tool rest. So another way of being solid, grounded, I anchor my arm here. I anchor my hand to my arm for stability. and I anchor my finger to solid ground, flaring those back fingers out so I don't get thrown into that airspace. Okay? Just like so. You can also use this in sanding those wing bowls. Okay? Now that's good. Now the neck here, you can try and go in under here and get in that curve, but I find it sometimes tricky. And if I go up here and I accidentally kiss that, it's going to be quite hazardous to my hand. So if I do that, I'm grounded to my tailstock, and I ground my fingers to the solid ground here, going down into that. Because if I touch both sides of that wood as it's spinning, it's going to throw my hand into this big wing. Okay? Now, if you're nervous about this, I'm just going to switch this so we can see. If you're nervous about doing that on that curve like this, what you can do is take a pencil, wrap your sandpaper around that pencil, and you hold that just like that, okay? A little further out of the line of fire. Okay, that's it for sanding, but I thought those were vital tips. Okay. Now I need to create a... Sorry, was there a question?
It's a very good technique.
Pardon, sorry?
Said those were very good tips.
Oh, okay, thanks. I just got my earplug out and I missed it, so thanks. All right, so now we create our tenon. Now, how do we create a tenon? You want to create a tenon the proper size to your chuck, and you want that tenon to be a perfect circle because that tenon will be your strongest hold possible. Now, why will a perfect circle be your strongest hold possible? That is because with a perfect circle, the full maximum surface area of each one of these chuck jaws is in contact with that wood. Maximum surface area, maximum compression, your strongest hold possible. If my tenon is too big, I'm only going to be contacted on these corners. If my tenon is too small, I'm only going to be in contact on the bottom of these gullets. So I don't have a strong hold. If I get a catch or I'm too aggressive, it will come flying off, okay? So perfect circle, strongest hold possible for the chuck that you're using. I'm using a one-way stronghold chuck, so my perfect circle is anywhere between 1 7/8 and 2 1/4 is a perfect circle, okay? So just to make sure I didn't go too small, no, I'm at 2 inches, so I have 1/8 to go. And I create this with a modified bowl gouge. Now my modified bowl gouge is a Thompson 1/4 inch bowl gouge. This was sharpened with the Varigrind, but it sharpened and I removed those wings. This is what I use to cut my tenons and my dovetails or my feet. Now at first I'm just truing up the bottom. And I come in and I close when I approach that wall. And that gives me my perfect right angle for my tenon. Okay. Now, how long should our tenon be? How deep should our tenon be? The distance from the top of our chuck body to the top of our chuck jaw to the bottom of our chuck body is a 1/2 inch. Now you don't want your tenon to be a 1/2 inch because we don't want to be bottomed out in the chuck. If we're bottomed out in the chuck, and we have a catch on that opposing corner, it gives it leverage to pop out of the chuck and come flying through the air. So you want a little bit of an air gap, a little bit of an airbag in between that wood and the bottom of your chuck body. So your best tenon possible is 3/8 in length, okay? Now that's about 1/8 of an inch. Now you can get away with 1/8 of an inch. You can get away with a 1/16, as long as you're not too heavy-handed, aggressive, and don't get a catch, okay? So I'm happy with that depth, and I'm happy with that size. Now I flip this around and I put it in the chuck. Are there questions while I just do this quick changeover? I'll take my earplug out there. And that's what you want. You have a good bite, a good spur drive that's driving that wood safely and efficiently, but more importantly, it's going to stay on the lathe. That's what you want when you remove your live center. Remove this because it's not funny when it hits your funny bone. Ask me how I know. I only did that once or twice, and then I forgot and did it once or twice more. But I don't do it anymore.
Just as a note, Stephen just joined in this evening. Stephen, personal note to you, we discussed that finish. If you catch our show on our program, our meeting on the recap, it would be posted in a couple of days. You'll get our responses to that.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Ken.
More than welcome, sir. We have a lot of folks tuning in tonight, and normally we call it a drop off when we see a reduction in the members attending each week. About halfway through the meeting, it kind of drops off a little bit. Guess what, Kade?
Pardon?
Guess what?
What?
They didn't leave.
Oh, that's good. Sweet.
We're all watching. This is as good as what Dane did last week. They're waiting, or Doug Rowe did last week. They're waiting for it to blow up, Kade.
I know. We're at the NASCAR race waiting for it to hit the wall. So here's the finish straight off the tool, sanded to 240. They were slicing cuts, not scraping cuts. You get a far better finish, less sanding. Okay. Now I have my chuck on. Oop. Rule of thumb, my hand in the chuck, my hand never leaves the chuck. You don't want to get doing something, forget that you left that in there, come back and start the lathe because you'll have an anti-tank round flying through the air. It could be very hazardous. So I always instill hand on the chuck key. It's in the chuck. Your hand never leaves that chuck key. The only time my hand leaves that chuck key is when it's back on my workbench. Okay. And that is a perfect circle because I want that 1/8 of an inch air gap in between my chuck jaws. Reassures I have a perfect circle. Maximum surface area compression, strongest hold possible if I am too heavy-handed or get a catch, okay? We can also see through the gap. I'm not bottomed out in the chuck, so it will not have leverage to come flying out of the chuck. One thing I tend to do is bring up my live center just for support as I tighten this, because sometimes with a serrated straight-sided chuck, if the bottom of that tenon lands within one of those serrations, as I tighten it, it can pop off slightly. But by bringing up your live center and giving it a half a turn or an 1/8 of a turn, I did a half a turn because my quill wasn't up against my live center yet. But if it was, I would only do roughly a quarter turn. okay? It reassures that my chuck jaws are up against that collar and they're compressing that tenon. So this will run as true as it did between centers. Now I can tighten my chuck. And I always tighten it from both holes, just in case one is loose. There must be 2 holes for a reason. But yeah, I want it to be tight enough because I don't want this flying through the air, especially with that sharp blade. Okay. What am I at? Okay, 40. Good time. The wood will also compress because it's wet. Okay. There we are. It's pretty good so far. All right, here I'll switch this down a little lower. Right about there. Now you can use hollowing rigs and hollowing systems. I don't have one, I don't own one. I don't feel the need. As long as you do it properly, good, safe tool control and presentation, it's totally safe. But of course, if there is a health issue or a shoulder problem, it is very beneficial in this process. So I do not own one yet, but if and when I acquire a shoulder problem, I may then invest in a hollowing rig. Right now I use hand tools and I sort of strong arm it. But as long as you have proper tool rest height, tool rest distance, you don't have to strong arm it as much as you may think, okay? Oh, that was a good one. Now I line up my tool rest parallel to this surface, okay? Give it a spin just to make sure we're not going to kiss anything. And we're good to go. I can also use my white backing if I choose to, just so I can see that spinning wood as it's spinning, and you can see that there. So as I'm turning this to get thin walls, I am looking down this side of the wall as I'm cutting on this side of the wall to gauge exactly how thick my wall thickness is. So wear a face shield, because if you hit this wrong and the bark comes flying off, it will be flying through this area. So definitely wear a face shield, okay? But I can't necessarily look directly over top of it because of the camera as well. So I will be looking at it slightly at an angle off the side. Now, to gauge wall thickness, if I want 1/8 of an inch wall thickness, I set this to 1/4 inch. And I will show you why. A little less there. That's about right. Yep. 1/4 inch. So now this part is just like a live edge bowl. We start, the grain is running in this direction, so we cut from the rim to the center of our live edge bowl in this fashion to maintain downhill cutting, because the fiber underneath supports the fiber being cut above it, okay? I'll show this cut here first. I line up the bevel. This bevel lines up corresponding to this outer wall. So when I enter, it gives me that consistent wall thickness. I'll show you that cut here as well. But in fact, I'm actually going to put a light on this so we can see the ghost wood live edge piece spinning on the lathe. It's a little bright, so I'll just tone it down a bit so we're not washed out. There we are. And I'll show that cut on this camera. Just going to remove this. So I enter, line up my bevel with the corresponding wall. Slowing down as I approach center. There we are. So that is how we would start or turn a live edge bowl. Now to get a consistent wall thickness, like I said before, I want 1/8 of an inch. So I set my calipers to 1/4 inch. So now I've sanded and finished the outside of this piece. I don't want to scratch it with my calipers. I have not sanded and finished the inside, so if I scratch it, big deal, it's going to be sanded anyway. So I ride this edge along this wall, gauging, there's my 1/8 of an inch wall thickness, and I want that to be consistent as I approach the neck of my birdmouth. And that is pretty good till about there. I'm off a 1/16. Okay. 1/16, big deal. But if I was really worried about it, I would take my pencil and I would mark that line. Now I know I ride my bevel here and I pick up my cut at that line to take a 1/16 of an inch to give me that perfect wall thickness. Now, if you're a 1/16 off, it's not too crucial, but if you're 1/8 or 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch difference between wall thickness, it can make a huge difference. Okay. There we are. That one was a 32nd. Now I have good consistent wall thickness from the top of my birdmouth hollow form to the base of my birdmouth hollow form. That 1/8 of an inch is consistent throughout. Okay. Now I want 1/8 of an inch gap between here and the opening. So if I take that and I eyeball it, pretty close. I switch to this camera, I can see, okay, there's the opening of my birdmouth hollow form. Now let's see how that corresponds to this camera. See, I have that 1/8 of an inch gap between the neck. So that will give me consistent 1/8 of an inch wall thickness to that point. Now let's talk quickly about hollowing. Now when we hollow, you hollow in steps. Now we could turn a portion of that away and then remove 1, 2, or you can actually drill a hole, which is actually a good depth stop so you don't make a funnel. Now I have multiple Jacob's chucks, so I always have drill bits set up. So the first thing we're going to do is I take my drill bit and I line up. I'm just looking over top quickly for a sec. You can see through my visor. I'm looking at this to line this up. And then from there, I set this on there. And I can see if I drilled to that point, I would be that deep. So I'm going to drill to about there. giving me a 1/4 inch on the bottom so I can refine the bottom, make the concave for the bottom so it sits flat, and that gives me my 1/8 of an inch base with my 1/8 of an inch walls so it dries evenly, efficiently, with minimal moving and warping, which will cause cracking. All right, now let's, oh, I got ahead of myself. I got to drill that hole. Now, whenever we use a drill, we want to hold on to the Jacob's chuck, because if the drill bit heats up, the wood will expand, grabbing the bit, outfeeding our Jacob's chuck, or potentially pulling this out, but less likely. Most likely this will outfeed and bind within there. Also, we want to drill through the wood. We don't want to burn through the wood. So if you drill properly at the end of this, you should be able to go like this, okay? You shouldn't be able to fry an egg on your drill bit, okay? If you can, the speed of the lathe is too high, or the feed rate is too slow, or the speed of the lathe is too slow, the feed rate is too fast, or a combination of all four, okay? So we don't want to burn through the wood, so we slow the lathe down to about 200. I bring this up so I'm just about in contact with the wood. Hold on to the Jacob's chuck. Now I'm going to do this in steps. I'm going to do maybe 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3 to my final depth. That will ensure that this doesn't heat up too much and I can't fry an egg on it. Okay? So I'll show a first drill in this position, and I'll actually I'll show the first one here, the entry. So I'm not against the wood yet. I'm about a 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 away. Now I feed my quill into the wood out there and remove it just as fast, because we do not want these to bind on the drill bit, heating it up too hot that we can't even grab it, okay? Also, you don't want those to build up in there, heat up, caramelize, because it will heat up the metal, expand the wood, grabbing your drill bit. So now I'm going to drill down to the bottom. There we are. And come out just as fast, holding on to my, and that is not too hot to hold on to. I cannot fry an egg on that. And that's what you want. We drilled through the wood. We didn't burn through the wood. That will also increase the longevity of your drill bits by not burning them. Now, where'd my, here it is, this guy. And also take this and reassure exactly how deep did we drill. Perfect. Okay. Now the first part of this, you can actually use your Ellsworth. You can use carbides. I will show carbides as well, the only two I have. But I would take my Irish grind or Ellsworth grind bowl gouge. Now I'm back up to 1600 RPMs. I enter and ride the bevel. Oh, a little whited out there, so I'm just going to tone that down slightly. There we are. You can remove some of the bulk of that wood with your Irish grind bowl gouge. Or you could use a carbide. There we are. I don't want to go too deep just yet. We do this in sections. So first off, I drill down to my depth. I then remove 1.5 of 4. Now I prepare to remove 2.5 of 5. Then I will remove 4 and 5 and refine 3 and 6 before I go to 7, 8, and 9. Okay? So I'll show you that now because we want to keep the structure down here. Well, we want to keep the structure down here before we go too thin because that keeps structure to the vibration and the movement of the wood from the tool hitting the wood. If I remove too much material down here, we have no more support up here to go thin. We'll have more vibration, more flexing, and then oh, bang! And we got 5 pieces of wood flying through the air. Okay? So that's why we do it in sections. Leave the meat down there for stability and support. Okay? Now the 2 carbide tools I'm going to use are, I'll actually just shut this off quick for a sec. This is my 6mm Hope hollowing tool, which is actually their tool that fits in their hollowing rig. I just bought this tool for the time being. Last time I was in England and Ireland attending a symposium. The only other carbide I own is my Swan Neck Easy Wood tool, and that allows us to get up and around that curve to refine our wall thickness to 1/8 of an inch. Okay? So those are the 2 tools I will be using today. Now, when you use a carbide, my tool rest is slightly above center, and I'm cutting at center, so my handle is in a little bit of a trailing mode. It will be far less aggressive, burying that carbide tip in the wood, giving you a very violent catch. Now, there are different carbide tips you can get where you cut at center or straight, horizontal, or parallel to your bedway, and cutting flat just like this. Okay. So first off, I remove this material here. Oh, little too aggressive. That's awesome. Well, that's never happened. Guess there's a first always. So now we're doing a hollow form, okay, a hollow vase. So I'm just going to true this up. Now, why did that happen? I was being a little overzealous, a little too aggressive to really remove some material just because I didn't want to take too much time. And I just sort of was too aggressive and the fibers tore from one another. I actually didn't get a blowout because this is still intact. It was actually too aggressive, too heavy of a cut, too much vibration, and the fibers severed. Okay, but maybe I can use that for something later. Okay, guess there's a first for everything. I've done tons of these and I've never blown one up. So first I just face across here. Now it's going to be a hollow vessel. Okay, but it's good to see what can go wrong and how to fix it potentially. So maybe I meant to do that, maybe not. Not so likely. All right, so now we're back at center. I'm using my carbide. And I'm removing my material back to define my wall thickness of 1/8 of an inch. Now straight up and down, it's going to be roughing cuts. You're going to remove a lot of material. Slightly angled, it's a shearing cut. And we can see that better on this camera. You see these set screws are aligned with my carbide, so that gives me a visual if I'm hogging wood or I'm shear scraping wood, okay? So here I'll really hog that wood away. And here I will get more of a finishing cut to really refine those walls, okay? And I'm just tucking up around that corner, removing 1, 2, half of 4, and half of 5. Now I could also do this with an Ellsworth gouge, but it would be a much different technique. So let's see where we're at here. But that'll still be a nice little hollow form vase. Maybe I'll make a lid and it'll be a small pattern or something. We'll see next week. All right. Now to remove this, you can use a vacuum, a hoover, and suck it right from the source. You can flick it out with your finger, but I do recommend turning the lathe off first.
Yeah.
One thing I do not recommend is get your face down here and blow in that hole, because all those fibers are going to go up under your glasses and in your eyes and in your nose and in your mouth. So I have a little hose here. This is actually a motorbike gas line. It's not used. And I just actually stand out of the way and blow all those fibers away. Now you're creating a little bit of airborne dust, but if I was doing this in my shop, I would be wearing a respirator, okay?
Kade, would there ever be a
double-
time where you would try to glue that piece that came off back on?
Pardon?
Would there ever be a time where you would try to glue the piece that came off back on, since it didn't separate, and you could almost put it back in the same exact position?
I suppose you could glue it back on. It would be quite a bit of time fussing around to try and get it perfect.
Yeah.
But with these severed marks, even if I patch that up, use wood filler, use wood dust, CA glue, different things, it will still show up as if it was cracked around that collar or it had been repaired somehow. So people will see a defect.
So
It will
not
be
really worth
quite
it. Okay,
visual.
okay.
It will stand out like a sore thumb. So rather than take the time to try and either flatten this and flatten this perfectly to get it to sit flush, you would still have that one seam that would show up a glue line.
Okay.
And people would see that.
Okay.
They might not notice or know what it is, but there would be a lot of time and fussing around to fix this to potentially get it to a finished piece where it could be sold, and you're not guaranteed it's going to work and it's going to get sold. So really, I would discard this. I would throw another one on the lathe, and it would be done in 15, 20 minutes if I didn't have to talk about it. Okay? So we'll just double check our wall thickness here. Oh, pretty good. 1/8 of an inch at the lip here. Not quite down here yet. So I know to continue in the hollowing. Now I'm hollowed into about here. I can actually remove material back to here, and I can do all of one. So actually what I'm going to do, so I've removed 1, 2, half of 4, and half of 5. I'm going to remove the other half of 4 and 5, and now I can get my swan neck in there to really remove 3 and 4 to give me a really good consistent wall thickness, okay? Here we are. I've removed 4 and 5 roughly. This guy, I have a little bit of fuzz here. All right. So now I have hollowed down to here. Now it allows me to get my swan neck in there, up and around this corner to refine that wall thickness. So I will do that now. Now with this tool, you want your tool rest out further from the opening, because it's flat on this side. I suppose you could run on this flat side, but if you do and you get a catch, it's very easy to twist. And if it twists, it will actually force that cutter deeper into the sidewall, creating more of a violent catch, potentially a blow up, but you might not be able to hold on to this. So what we want to do is we want to move our tool rest back further so we're anchored on the solid part of the steel here. That will give us ample support from that twisting action if we did get a catch. Okay, so here I'm on solid ground, much harder to twist on me, burying that in the wood, and this will blow up into 5 pieces. Okay, so just a little tip, you don't want to ride on this flat small part because it's a good fulcrum to just go woo. Okay. All right, one thing I wanted to mention was how I hold the tool and where I anchor it to my body. Okay, so here, when I'm using this tool and I'm hollowing the inside, I am looking down it like the barrel of a rifle. I have it anchored to my body and I am moving in and out, but this hand moves in, out, and side to side. Okay? I don't want my elbow way out here because I'll have more vibration, more torque, and that could be hazardous to your elbow, your joints. So have it anchored to your body. Okay? Now when I use this one, since it's much longer, I actually tuck it slightly under my armpit or up into my shoulder as if I'm holding a shotgun. Okay? And there, again, I move back and forth. This hand moves back and forth to articulate that cutter where I want it to go. Okay? Nice new bit. I actually just sharpened it before. Now we're also rely on sound as wood turners. So if we have a certain sound within that first inch and we're trying to get consistent wall thickness, once that sound gets very close to that pitch here, we know our wall thickness is getting fairly close. Now let's just double check. It's beneficial to double check because once you remove the wood, you can't put it back. Okay. There we are. Now I'm at my 1/8 of an inch wall thickness. I will just verify that with a visual of my caliper, and I can show you that on this white background. So here, I have the same amount of gap. Oh, almost there, but I actually got up and around the corner, so I'm very close. Okay, so we'll start here, refine that a little more, and I'll be at my 1/8 of an inch. It's very close. So if you're happy with that, you might get away with it, you might not, depending if it's a limb or a trunk. There's a lot more twist on a limb and stress on a limb. So inconsistent wall thickness will crack more than from the trunk of the tree. Now remember, this is wet wood, and I want to keep it at some sort of an equilibrium because I don't want it to dry too much and warp on me before I finish the wall thickness, because if it does start to move and warp on me as I'm turning, I'll get a thin wall, a thick wall, a thin wall, a thick wall, added vibration, and then boom, 4 pieces of wood flying through the air, okay? So what I need to do is I need to rehydrate this wood to bring it back to an equilibrium so it doesn't move as much before I'm done. So what I do is I use the same solution I use when I start applying my finish, and that is a diluted polymerized tung oil, 50-50 with mineral spirits. Okay. Now that will keep that hydrated and not moving as much until I hollow that to a consistent wall thickness. And once I'm done the inside, I also do the inside to create an equilibrium of moisture again so it dries evenly. Okay. There we are. So now I'm down to here. Yep. So a little bit more there. And then I will remove 7, 8, and 9. Oh, my tool rest is far too close for me to be supported on this part of the tool. I would only be supported here. So I need to move my tool rest back slightly. Be very conscious of where this bit is as we take this in and out of that hollow form. We do not want to kiss anywhere unexpectedly, giving us a pleasant surprise. There. Now I'm happy with that. And I'm happy with my wall thickness on the top 2/3 of that hollow form. Okay. Now I need to remove 7, 8, and 9. So matter of fact, since I have this out, since I have my swan neck out, and it's in hand, I can actually start and I can go in on this angle, start removing 7, go into 8, and then refine 9 to my consistent wall thickness, okay? So I don't necessarily need to change tools. I could go back to my straight tool and remove the center portion and then go back to my swan neck. But since I have this in hand, I can do it all with this. I just have it slightly angled, so I go into the center and I come across the bottom. There, I'm at the bottom of my depth stop where I drilled to. Now I just need to refine the wall to the following wall thickness. But it's amazing when they fill up with that amount of shavings how it throws your tool around. You don't want too much vibration, and you don't want your tool being thrown around, because when you're going this thin, if you get a whoops, it's a boom. It's not just a whoops. You don't have enough there to do another pass. Yep. Actually turn this up slightly. There we are. Now I'm at the bottom of that drill bit. There we are. And again, double check our wall thickness. Now, I still need to remove some of the wood at the base, like we can see in this picture. We do majority of it, but then we have to refine the bottom of the base to get that 2/3, 1/3, or that golden ratio. Make the base more petite, it gives the piece more lift. Also incorporating that golden rule. So I create an 1/8 of an inch wall thickness all the way down to here, and I leave maybe 3/16 to refine this into the tenon to give me the 2/3, 1/3. Giving me the golden ratio, but also a more petite base, giving it lift. Now I'm a little thick here, so I just need to remove that. Double check again, just to make sure. Better safe than sorry, we've gotten this far. Yeah, there we are. One more pass, one more pass. I have wall thickness here and here, a little thicker in here. You're starting to get that harmonic tone of the wall thickness being consistent, so I know I'm getting very close. And famous last words, final pass, one more pass, one more pass. Now all I need to do is flip this, refine the bottom, and remove my tenon. Yep, I'm happy with that wall thickness. And I'll show you the inside after, what the finish is off the tool. Now when I sand hollow forms, depending how deep this isn't that bad. I can fit my fingers in here, I can sand. Just be careful, you don't want these bound in a tight corner and getting torqued with the torque of the lathe. So if they're tight, bring one out slightly and just use this portion of the tool to sand, or your finger to sand, okay? And I'm happy with that. But if you have a deep form or a hollow form that's fairly deep, that you would be nervous or conscious of putting your hand in that hollow form, if you're nervous and you think you shouldn't do it, probably shouldn't do it because it could hurt you. So I have a really handy high-tech tool here. It's sandpaper attached to a broomstick. And that's what I use for my very deep urns. and vases, floor vases, that sort of thing. This is 80 grit. And here's a smaller one. This one is 120, okay? Now this allows me to get in there and sand without having my hand in any harm's way. Also, if this were to come off, oh, I have a little bit of a ding there. Just true this up slightly. There we are. Here's my alarm. Yep, I had a little bit of a chip, so I had enough meat there I could still remove it. Okay. Now when sanding this, it's really good because I can get in there and sand, hands out of the way, but also if this comes off the lathe, I can actually guide it away from me so I am not in the line of fire. Okay. Just like so. And then I would go to my finer grit. If the red part of the tape rubs off, that's okay. Our final pass can be by hand. But your by hand sanding only has to go as deep as all your wood turning buddies can feel, because they're going to be the only ones who are concerned with the inside finish of this hollow form. The general public are only concerned with the outside profile and the outside condition of the hollow form. It's what they see. Okay. Now, if I wanted to sand this by hand, I would hold this like this against this finger. I just go to the bottom and up the side, but conscious that I do not get my fingers bound within that hole. So we can see that here. I am never bound within a hole. Okay, that's good for sanding. And now at this time, I need to bring it back to an equilibrium so it doesn't move, shift, warp as I am doing the inside. These are great little finish holders if anyone's planning on having a kid or has grandkids or kids who have kids. Take a couple of their formula bottles. It's great for holding your 50-50 mixture of the oil of your choice and the solvent of your choice.
Kim is still with us. Kim, he's got some pictures of Cash almost crawling.
Yeah, he's growing up so quick. He's 29 inches and he's like 22 pounds. So he's going to be a football player. Well, champ. All right, so now we take it off the lathe. He's back to a little bit of sleep regression though, so sleep's a little tough at times. He might be teething too, so I think that could be a contributor. All right, now let's see the finish on the inside of this. Here we have our finished hollow form. Oh, I need a little bit of more oil in there. I missed a spot. There we have our hollow form, which if it was a birdmouth, it would have been, oh, there we are. Now I need to remove my tenon. But before I do that, I actually want to take a depth gauge to get a visual. Now you can make really cool fancy depth gauges. I get mine at the dollar store. You get a whole lot of them for $1. I just stick that in the center. I align the two walls to there, and I know that I am that deep into this hollow form. So once I merge these walls to my bottom 1/3 to the 2/3 maximum diameter, I'll actually go slightly into my tenon and create that concave, giving me 1/8 of an inch all around, so this moves evenly and dries evenly. Now, if it were a birdmouth hollow form, you can't use coal jaws. I suppose you could use a vacuum chuck, but you would have to tone down the suction for the thin walls. You could use pin jaws or collet jaws or step jaws, which would actually go within the opening of that recess and expand to hold that piece. But you have to take into account how thin the walls how thin did I go on the walls? Will it be able to withstand that pressure? I don't do it that way. I do it with a pressure chuck. So I take a scrap piece of wood and I mount it on the lathe. And this is my pressure chuck. Which will actually go, you could also create a jam chuck to jam the opening of that hollow form. But also need to take into account how thin the walls are, how much force is going to be on the bottom as I am removing that wood, how heavy of a cut am I taking. So I find this to be the easiest way. Well, easiest and safest way for me anyway, because I don't feel I need vacuum chucks and coal jaws and all the fancy stuff. You can get away with the basic of the basic. Okay. So now I have this to the same curve as the bottom of my form because I do not want to dent it too much. I use router mat for padding, just so it doesn't dent the wood or it doesn't. If this spins, I don't want the wood friction burning a burn in the bottom of my hollow form. So this will also counteract that. Now, this is router mat, dollar store, best bang for your buck. A little too tight. I don't want to split those walls. So I'll actually do it this way. Still a little too tight. So I'll grab my skew and I'll just refine this quickly.
Kate, if I may at this point. Kate. Okay, folks, we're running a little long while Kate's tuning this in. We're going to finish this piece. We may not get to the video gallery or gallery tonight because our 9 o'clock stay is where we want to be, but we don't want to miss this demo. So stick with us. We'll see this and then wrap it up. Thank you.
There we are. Now it fits. It's not too tight. It's not going to split our thin walls. And the reason I left that pinhole is so I can recenter this with my live center. There we are. Now, how tight is too tight? If you hear a crack, it's too tight. If it doesn't turn, it's too loose. If I remove all this and it pops back and cracks, it was too tight and I went too thin. So it comes with a little bit of trial and error and practice, okay? Now I'm using my bow gouge, so I'm below center, cutting at center with that bottom wing. My wife gave me a cold. I'm just getting over that, but at least it's not COVID. What I did here was I just checked it with my finger to see it was running true. Do it back here. Don't do it right here where you can get caught between that tool rest, okay? The tool rest will cut, the wood will burn. I'm just going to refine this to blend this. And I'm doing a peeling cut or a shearing cut. So I have far less drag and vibration. There we are. Now I'm at my 1/3, 2/3. So now all I need to do is shear scrape that for a finished surface. There we are. Remove my tool rest as it slows down, or stop it completely. Would be your safest bet. Sand this again here, just to blend any wobble. Now your fingers shouldn't be burning when you sand. If your fingers are burning while you're sanding, the speed of your lathe is too fast or the pressure you are applying is too heavy. If you apply too much pressure or sand at a high speed, the wood will heat up and can potentially crack as it dries too quickly. Now, whenever I sand, I would be wearing a full respirator. But an added benefit of reapplying this oil is I'm wet sanding. So it's a much heavier dust that settles to the floor rather than in my lungs. The only thing is you sacrifice sandpaper because it clogs up your sandpaper. That's okay. I'll happily sacrifice sandpaper over my lungs. Okay? And also by doing this and wet sanding, you actually get a better finish. There we are. Nice and smooth. Ooh, baby bottom smooth. A little bit of oil so we don't dry out. And I know when I checked my depth gauge with my fancy depth gauge from the dollar store, I was right about here. Well, I was bottomed here, so if I'm about here with my concave, I will have 1/8 of an inch wall thickness. Maybe a little less, actually.
Well, if we haven't mentioned it earlier early this evening, I did mention it, pardon me. If you want to be on our contact list, put the information you wish to share with members and members only in our chat. And while you're looking at the chat, Doug Miller's released details that he's going to have a demonstration tomorrow on turning a walnut bowl. And I think he's got a giveaway. So watch Wood Spun Round tomorrow and check out what Doug's up to. And thank you, Doug, for handling the gallery tonight.
Not a problem.
All right, last little bit. I just need to remove that and we'll be done. Might have gone a little bit over time, but I didn't want to leave too much out.
Nope, we're going to continue until you're at the sub, sir.
Okay. So I'll get up to my speed. I'm back up to 1400. I come across to face the surface to give me that concave. Here we are. There we are. And at that point, you can sand or you can cut through. If I have more material, I would create a triangle to remove that. But we're pretty good. I'm actually gonna just double check my wall thickness here. Yeah, I got some meat there. Oh, no, that ain't happening. So at that point, that's okay. What I would do is I would normally leave a lot more meat on the bottom so I could remove that and reduce this to a triangle. Reduce that to roughly a 1/16 of an inch. Knock that little nib off and sand the bottom. But what we can do is we can actually use my handy little sanding tool here. And we can actually remove that nub that way. It's a little safer than potentially trying to do that last pass and making a funnel. So what I do is sometimes you can buy sanders, you can buy tiny sanders, but you can also make them. So here I have a little cone I turned. I took some hot melt glue and a piece of 240. I hot melt glued it to my cone. It didn't quite stick, so I took a little bit of CA glue and I CA glued that to the hot melt glue. But the hot melt glue gives it a little bit of flex to form to the bottom of that bowl. And I mean, we're going to buy wood anyway. Why not make a sanding disc to sand those little nubs off the bottom of your bowl? Yeah. So I took a piece of sandpaper, I hot melt glued it, I CA'd it, and then I did a pass with my skew just to true it up to give me a nice circular piece that I can sand the bottom off with. Okay. Just got to be careful you do not kiss those sidewalls where we created that concave. Now another thing you could also do is just to make it a little quicker is you can take a small, now this is wet wood and it's gumming up. Oh, the sandpaper flew off. Look at that. It's all right. Super glue. Put the super glue on the paper. I put the activator on the hot melt glue. I press this on and Bob's your uncle. And I just put on a 180. So it might go a little quicker. But while that dries, we can take our antique gouge and we can parry that little nub off. Now keep your hand below this surface. Okay, keep your hand below this surface because if you slip, you don't want to go through your hand. Okay, don't hold it up here. Okay, ask me how I know. Here we are. Now I want to cut across those fibers because if I cut with the fibers, I will actually, if I cut with those fibers, depending on the curl and the swirl, which way those fibers go, you might sever below the surface, creating a funnel. But by cutting across those fibers, we get down to that surface slightly quicker. And at that point, all I need to do is I can either hand sand with the fibers, or I can use my handy little sanding thing here to blend the bottom. Here we are. There. We have a nice perfect bottom to our hollow form.
Kade, are you with us now? Can you hear us?
Pardon?
Okay, now we got you. That is one beautiful piece. I know you blew it up a little while ago. That was, but you recovered. And you recovered the way a wood turner would recover. No waste wood, no nothing into the burn pile. Well, a little bitty piece, but you can save that and do something with it, couldn't you?
Yeah, I'm actually going to create a lid for that, so it'll be a lidded hollow form.
All right. We did get a lot of comments in the chat tonight, folks. If you would save the chat, and if you want to be on our contact list, put that information on the chat. Kate, you did wonderful. You did wonderful tonight.
Yes. Great job, Kate. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Lady
Yeah, Kate,
accolades
that was
on it, folks.
excellent.
Excellent demo.
Good, Kate.
Great job, Kate.
Yeah,
Made
you
a
did
hollow form
wonderful.
and the bird's mouth.
And think about this. That was an IRD you got for free.
One of the few nights I didn't go to sleep.
And it'll be on our webpage.
That's
Yes.
right.
Oh, here, I just got to go to the chat here.
Okay.
There, copy that into the chat from my phone. So just a point of interest if anyone's interested.
He's got an interactive IRD set for November 13th. Let me tell you, folks, straight up, I love his IRDs because every time he demonstrates with us, I walk away with something else in my pocket. And you can too. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Kate.
Kate. Appreciate it. Tell Cash we said hello.
I will,
Kate,
thank you.
For
Thanks,
I
Kate.
know it's late, but I got a question for you.
Go ahead,
Okay,
please.
what's the question?
When you're doing your scraping cuts, what part of that tool is actually hitting the piece?
When
You
I
know,
am doing my shear
Look.
scraping cut?
Yes.
Okay. With the Irish grinder Ellsworth gouge. So with my gouges or my Irish grind gouges, you can see here, the nose of my gouge is 60 to 65 degrees. My
Okay.
55-degree one is my rougher. This is my finisher. Okay.
Okay.
So I have a slightly higher wing, but I like a really swept back flat spot. Now, when I am doing that shear scrape, I am actually on the tool. Actually, I'll switch to this camera here. And my tool rest is low. This is higher. And I am actually scraping with the long flat part of that swept back flat part
Okay.
on my, oh, sorry, on my tool here.
Yeah,
But that tool is actually presented slightly angled, so the fibers of the wood come across that on a skewed angle as they come across, which gives you less drag, less resistance, a much finer cut. That's why you get that fine angel hair shavings for a finishing cut. So I'm
Okay.
actually riding along this flat side here on that skewed angle. So the wood would be like this.
okay.
And that tool would be presented similar, same angle as a skew. You just drop the angle, so I present that swept back flat side to do the shear scrape. And as the wood cuts down across that, just like so at that angle,
Uh-huh.
it gives you that fine angel hair and that superior finish with very little sanding.
Okay,
Gotta
thank
play
you.
with, gotta play with it, Sue. Play with it a little
Yeah.
bit on junk
I-
wood, please.
So if
I
I
will-
show you on this camera, the wing of the tool is actually above center. My tool rest is lower, and the tool is presented just like that. I don't know if you can see that on the far view, but maybe we can here. Yep,
Oh, I
there
see
we
it.
are.
Okay. Okay. I wasn't sure whether you were using that bottom slice or whether you were using the tip. That's why I asked.
No, it's not the tip, because if I lift the handle and I drop that nose, that wing is actually going to catch the wood, creating a little scallop where that catches. It'll
Okay.
catch and leave a little scallop in that wood. So I
Okay.
am actually shear scraping with the flat side of the swept back flat side part, and it is presented just like so. And it looks closed, but I am actually riding the bevel right here.
All right. So your bevel there is 60. What is your other bevel that you're using to ease it?
The bevel at the nose is 60, but it's
Uh-huh.
swept back. So back here, it's 120.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
No
There,
problem.
there we go.
Thank you, Kade.
Thanks, Cade. Appreciate it. You have no
Kate,
idea.
Kate, again, you did a wonderful job, sir. You really did. I'm fascinated. Most of our members are. They stayed with us tonight. This will be on our website and a repeat in case folks want to see more. And Dave, our webmaster, will go ahead and chop up the whole segment of being there. It'll be probably 2 hours long when he gets to it. But Kate, wonderful job, sir. Fantastic work, great instruction, and proud to have had you do this tonight.
Outstanding.
Thanks, everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kate.
Dave.
Appreciate it.
Oh,
That's
very
great. Good job.
Fantastic.
Everyone.
Great job, Kate. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.